First contact fallout. The next confederation had existed for 12,000 years. In that time, they had encountered 47 spacefaring species, catalogued over 30,000 worlds, and developed technologies that could reshape planets and harness the energy of stars. They were, by any reasonable measure, the pinnacle of galactic civilization. So when their survey ships first detected radio signals from a previously unexplored arm of the galaxy, the High Council assigned it the lowest priority designation. Another primitive species taking its first steps into the void. Unremarkable. Predictable. The standard first contact protocols would suffice. Senior analyst Vexlerin reviewed the preliminary reports with practiced disinterest. As head of the Confederation's Emerging Species Division, he had overseen first contact with 17 different civilizations. The process was routine: observe from a distance, assess technological capabilities, determine resource utilization patterns, and then make recommendations to the Council on whether the species warranted diplomatic engagement or simply ongoing observation. Another carbon-based bipedal species, he noted, his 4 eyes scanning the holographic data streams floating before him. Oxygen Brothers. Single homeworld. Early nuclear capability. Rudimentary spaceflight. His assistant, Neri, scrolled through the visual feeds captured by the long-range probes. They appear quite aggressive. Their planetary broadcasts contain significant references to territorial conflicts. Typical of early-stage development, Vexlerin dismissed with a wave of his slender hand. They'll either learn cooperation or destroy themselves before achieving any meaningful interstellar capability. Schedule a follow-up survey in 50 cycles. The matter would have ended there. Another species to be monitored from afar, if not for the Myriad incident. The Confederation research vessel Myriad was conducting standard gravitational mapping in a system 30 light-years from Earth when its sensors detected an anomaly. A small vessel, utilizing a crude fusion drive, had entered the system. The vessel was clearly of human design, though the humans should not have possessed technology capable of such distance. The captain of the Myriad, operating under standard protocols, authorized the capture of the human ship for analysis. The 5 humans aboard were placed in stasis for eventual return to their homeworld, and the vessel was brought into the Myriad's research bay. That's when everything the Confederation thought they knew began to unravel. This propulsion system cannot possibly work, Chief Engineer Tasval declared, her tendrils twitching with agitation as she circled the human vessel. It violates at least 3 fundamental efficiency principles. The thermal management alone should cause catastrophic failure. Vexlerin had been summoned personally, an unusual step for what should have been a routine analysis. He studied the crude ship with growing unease, and yet it crossed 30 light-years. With technology at least 3 centuries behind our initial assessment, Tasval confirmed. They've improvised, created workarounds that shouldn't function but somehow do. The analysis only grew more concerning as they delved deeper. The humans had cobbled together technologies in ways that defied conventional engineering progression. Where most species followed predictable technological development paths, moving from chemical rockets to fusion to quantum drives in sequence, humans had somehow leapfrogged entire stages by creating hybrid systems that, by all rights, should have exploded spectacularly. Their radiation shielding is inadequate by our standards, another analyst noted. The crew compartment shows evidence of exposure levels that should have been lethal. Vexlerin examined the medical scans of the humans in stasis, and yet they show adaptive cellular responses. Their bodies appear to be compensating. The communications officer interrupted. Senior analyst, we've decrypted their ship logs. You need to see this. The holo display flickered to life, showing the human crew's final entries before capture. Day 157. Second reactor failing. Zhu says we can crosswire it with the backup cooling system to maintain thrust. Carson thinks it'll blow us all to hell, but we're dead anyway if we drift out here. Worth a shot. Day 183. Food reserves critical. Implementing one-meal protocol. Martinez found a way to recycle the protein cultures using the waste filtration enzymes. Tastes like burning plastic that keeps us moving. Day 211. Navigation array completely offline. Wang has rigged the sensor dish to manually track stellar positions. We're calculating trajectories by hand now, like some kind of space Columbus. Better than nothing. As the logs continued, Vexillarian felt a creeping sensation along his spine that his species had evolved specifically to warn of existential threats. These humans hadn't embarked on this mission with superior technology. They'd simply refused to accept the limitations of the technology they had. When a system failed, they didn't abort. They improvised. When faced with impossible odds, they calculated new probabilities. When their bodies began to fail, they adapted and continued. Compile all data and transmit to the High Council, Vexillarian ordered, his voice tight. Recommend immediate elevation to Priority Alpha designation. Neri's eyes widened. Alpha? But they're barely into their solar system. They have no significant fleet, no defensive capabilities beyond their atmosphere. They crossed 30 light years in a ship held together with improvised parts and sheer determination. Vexillarian cut her off. Their technology isn't advanced. They are. And that is infinitely more dangerous. 3 days later, the High Council convened an emergency session. For the first time in 2,000 years, all 7 Confederation elder species were represented in person rather than by hologram. The chamber hummed with tense energy as Vexillarian presented his findings. And in conclusion, while humans remain technologically inferior, their cognitive approach presents unprecedented variables. They do not recognize impossibility as a limiting factor. When conventional solutions fail, they create unconventional ones. Their adaptability extends beyond technology to their physiology, psychology, and social structures. Elder Zova, the ancient representative of the Lumidari, leaned forward on his gravity throne. You speak in abstractions, analyst. What precise threat do you believe these humans pose? Vexillarian activated the central projection, displaying the captured human vessel alongside the standard technological progression model used by the Confederation for thousands of years. They should not have been able to build this ship for at least 300 more cycles, yet here it is. They should not have survived the journey, yet they did. They solve problems differently than any species we have encountered. If we apply our standard predictive models to them, we will be catastrophically wrong. The council chamber filled with uneasy murmurs. Elder Teresh of the Voidborn raised a luminescent tentacle. What do you recommend? We have 2 options, Vexillarian stated firmly. First, immediate and overwhelming containment. We quarantine their system, prevent any further expansion, and manage them as a potential threat indefinitely. The projection shifted to show Earth, surrounded by a theoretical containment field. Several council members nodded in approval. And the second option? Elder Zova prompted. Vexillarian hesitated, knowing his next words might end his career. We initiate diplomatic contact. We bring them into the Confederation, not as a protectorate species, but as potential equals. The chamber erupted in outrage. Elder Korvax slammed his armored claw against the ancient stone table. Equals. They are barely interplanetary. The protocols have stood for 12 millennia. No species joins as equals until they have demonstrated Tier 3 technological mastery. The protocols assume logical technological progression. Vexillarian countered, raising his voice above the din. Humans don't follow that progression. If we wait until they achieve Tier 3 status on their own, we may find they've surpassed us in ways we cannot predict. The debate raged for hours, ultimately splitting the council. The containment faction, led by Elder Korvax, argued for immediate quarantine protocols. The integration faction, smaller but supported by the influential Lumidari, pushed for diplomatic engagement. In the end, the council reached a compromise that satisfied no one. Limited controlled contact would be established, while defensive measures were quietly put in place should containment become necessary. The humans in stasis would be returned to their vessel, their memories adjusted to remove any knowledge of the Confederation, and the ship would be placed back on its original trajectory. As Vexillerin left the council chamber, Elder Zova beckoned him aside. "You truly believe these humans represent something unique?" the ancient alien asked, his voice like dry leaves rustling. Vexillerin nodded solemnly. "In 12,000 years, we have encountered species with greater strength, longevity, intelligence, and technology. But never have we found a species that so fundamentally refuses to accept the impossible. I fear that quality above all others." The elder's compound eyes studied him for a long moment. "Then we shall hope your integration faction prevails, analyst. For if history has taught us anything, it is that those who cannot be contained eventually become the ones who contain others." As the human vessel was prepared for release, Vexillerin stood in the observation bay, watching the final adjustments. These 5 humans had unknowingly changed the course of Confederation policy. When they returned to Earth, they would remember only a difficult journey and strange dreams. They would not know they had been judged and found terrifying by the oldest civilization in the galaxy. The real question, the one that kept Vexillerin awake during rest cycles, was what would happen when humanity discovered they were not alone. The Confederation had always controlled first contact, managing the psychological and sociological impact on emerging species. But humans, it seemed, didn't respond as expected to anything. And that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The Reckoning. 3 Earth years after the Myriad incident, the containment faction had steadily gained influence within the Confederation Council. Reports of accelerating human technological development fed their concerns. The humans had established a permanent lunar base, launched successful missions to Mars, and were developing more advanced propulsion systems at an alarming rate. Vexillerin had been marginalized for his advocacy of integration, reassigned to a monitoring post in a distant system. However, he maintained a network of loyal analysts who continued to provide him with data on humanity's progress. "They've achieved rudimentary quantum communication," Neri reported during one of their clandestine transmissions, 50 years ahead of projection. The containment faction is using this to justify increased military presence near Sol. Vexillerin's office aboard Outpost Zeta-9 was small, a reflection of his diminished status. "And the humans? Have they detected our observation platforms?" "No confirmation, but there's been increased activity around Jupiter's moons where we placed the long-range sensors. It could be coincidence." It wasn't coincidence, as events would soon prove. On what humans would call a Tuesday, the Confederation military vessel Inexorable detected an unidentified ship approaching one of the cloaked observation platforms orbiting Jupiter. Standard protocol dictated non-interference, but the Inexorable's commander, Drav Korvax, son of Elder Korvax and staunch containment advocate, made a different decision. The human vessel was captured using a gravitic tractor beam. Unlike the previous encounter, these humans were not a lost exploration team but a military task force specifically searching for signs of extraterrestrial technology. Their ship contained advanced scanning equipment and weapon systems. Commander Korvax transmitted directly to the High Council, bypassing standard reporting protocols. "The humans have become aware of our presence and are actively seeking our technology. I recommend immediate implementation of full containment procedures." The Council, alarmed by this development, authorized a limited containment operation, a blockade of the Sol system using cloaked vessels to prevent further human expansion, while they deliberated on permanent measures. This might have succeeded if not for 2 critical factors: the humans' unconventional detection methods and the arrogance of Commander Korvax. Earth's deep space monitoring stations had been searching for specific energy signatures, radiation patterns, propulsion emissions, communication frequencies. But a small team at NASA had developed an alternative detection system based on gravitational microfluctuations, theorizing that advanced propulsion would create ripples in space-time. This system, considered experimental and unreliable by mainstream scientists, suddenly began registering dozens of anomalies throughout the outer solar system. At first dismissed as equipment malfunction, the readings became impossible to ignore when they began moving in coordinated patterns. Humanity realized they were not alone and possibly under siege. Meanwhile, Commander Korvax, emboldened by the Council's authorization of the blockade, decided to make a demonstration of Confederation power. His vessel decloaked in Earth orbit, visible to billions of humans, and broadcast a message in multiple human languages. People of Earth, your system is now under the protection of the Nix Confederation. For your safety and development, interstellar travel beyond your local planets is prohibited. Compliance will ensure peace. Resistance will be met with appropriate measures. The message, intended to establish Confederation authority and prevent conflict, had exactly the opposite effect. Within hours, every military force on Earth was mobilized. The lunar base, officially a scientific outpost, revealed defensive systems that had been developed in secret. The Mars colonies activated communication protocols that bypassed conventional channels. What the Confederation didn't understand, what Vexilarian had tried to warn them about, was that humans had spent their entire history telling stories about alien invasions. They had mentally rehearsed this scenario thousands of times, and in their stories, humanity always fought back. The High Council, furious at Korvax's unauthorized revelation, scrambled to control the situation. Vexilarian was hastily recalled from his outpost, his expertise suddenly valuable again. "You've provoked them in the worst possible way," he raged at the Council. "Their cultural mythology is filled with narratives of resistance against technologically superior invaders. Your blockade and Korvax's ultimatum have confirmed their deepest fears and their most cherished self-perception, that they are the underdogs who triumph against impossible odds." Elder Zova's hologram flickered with concern. "What do they intend, analyst? Their technology cannot challenge our blockade." "Their technology? No," Vexilarian agreed. "But we've never faced a species that had already imagined fighting us for centuries before we met. The first human countermeasure was not a military strike, but an information weapon. They broadcast every transmission they had intercepted from Confederation vessels, including fragmentary communications that revealed disagreement within the Confederation about how to handle humanity. This brilliant psychological operation achieved two objectives. It demonstrated to Earth's population that the aliens were neither unified nor invincible, and it signaled to the Confederation that humans understood the politics at play. Commander Korvax, humiliated by the Council's rebuke and the humans' defiance, took matters into his own hands. The inexorable fired upon a human military satellite, destroying it as a warning measure. The humans responded not with terror, but with calculated asymmetric warfare. While the Confederation expected conventional military responses, missiles, perhaps, or attempts at direct engagement, the humans instead launched what appeared to be debris, thousands of small objects with minimal propulsion capabilities. The Confederation's defensive systems, designed to track weapons and ships, initially ignored this space junk. By the time they recognized the threat, it was too late. The debris contained quantum-entangled communication devices that attached to Confederation ships, creating a mapping network that revealed the positions of every cloaked vessel in the blockade. Simultaneously, human hackers, using the quantum communication technology they had reverse-engineered faster than thought possible, launched continuous cyberattacks against Confederation systems. They couldn't breach the alien firewalls, but they didn't need to. The sheer volume of attacks forced the Confederation ships to divert significant processing power to defense, slowing their operations. In the midst of this chaos, Vexilarian received an unexpected transmission. A human representative, a woman identified as Admiral Helena Chen, requested direct communication. Against the Council's orders, Vexilarian accepted. "Your blockade cannot succeed," Admiral Chen stated without preamble, her face composed but resolute on the view screen. "Not because we can defeat your technology, but because you fundamentally misunderstand what you're containing." "Explain," Vexilarian replied, intrigued despite the gravity of the situation. Your ships are currently surrounded by 5,000 microsatellites mapping their every move. Your communications are being flooded by our cyber attacks. We've identified 7 distinct energy signatures in your fleet, suggesting 7 different technology bases, or perhaps species. And we've done all this with technology you consider primitive. She leaned closer to the camera. We don't need to leave our solar system to advance. You've brought your technology to us. Every minute this blockade continues, we learn more. Vexillaren felt the familiar sensation of existential dread return. What do you propose? Withdrawal of your forces and open diplomatic contact. Either we join your confederation as equals, or we develop on our own terms without interference. Those are the only options that don't end with escalation. The audacity was breathtaking. A species with fraction of the Confederation's technological advancement dictating terms. But Vexillaren recognized the underlying truth. Containing humanity would require their complete destruction. Anything less would only delay the inevitable. The Council debated for 3 full cycles while the blockade remained in place, increasingly compromised by human countermeasures. Confederation ships reported systems malfunctions, targeting errors, and communication disruptions. None critical, but collectively debilitating. Finally, Elder Zova cast the deciding vote. We will withdraw and establish diplomatic relations. The containment faction has demonstrated the futility of their approach. Finally, Elder Zova cast the deciding vote. We will withdraw and establish diplomatic relations. The containment faction has demonstrated the futility of their approach. Commander Korvax, ordered to stand down, instead launched a final desperate attack. The inexorable targeted Earth's primary spaceport with its main weapon system, intending to demonstrate the consequences of defiance. What happened next would be studied in Confederation military academies for millennia. The human lunar base fired what appeared to be a primitive projectile weapon, essentially a railgun of enormous proportions. The projectile, a tungsten rod accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, struck the inexorable precisely at its main weapon housing. The Confederation vessel, its shields calibrated for energy weapons and dimensional attacks, was catastrophically damaged by this simple kinetic impact. Commander Korvax and his bridge crew perished instantly. As the surviving Confederation ships processed this shocking development, Admiral Chen transmitted again. That was one weapon, developed and built in the 3 days since your blockade began. We have 27 more in various stages of completion. We would prefer not to use them. The blockade was lifted within hours. The High Council, faced with irrefutable evidence that humanity could not be conventionally contained, authorized full diplomatic recognition and the beginning of integration proceedings. 6 months later, Vexillaren stood in the newly constructed Confederation Embassy in Geneva, watching the formal signing of the Treaty of Sol. Humans would join the Confederation not as a protectorate species, but as a provisional equal member, the first such designation in Confederation history. You were right from the beginning, Neri observed, now restored as his senior assistant. They are unlike any species we've encountered. Vexillaren watched as the human representatives conferred among themselves, their expressions animated, their gestures energetic. They achieved in 3 years what took other species centuries, not through superior technology, but through superior adaptation and psychological warfare. Do you think they can be trusted as allies? Neri asked quietly. Vexillaren considered the question carefully. I believe they will honor agreements that benefit them, but they will never truly submit to external authority. The Confederation will need to evolve to accommodate them, which is precisely why they are valuable. As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Chen approached the alien delegation, Senior Analyst Vexillaren. She greeted him. I understand we have you to thank for advocating on humanity's behalf from the beginning. I merely recognize the inevitable, he replied diplomatically. Your species cannot be contained, only partnered with. Chen smiled, the expression both warm and somehow predatory. We prefer partnership as well. Though I admit, your Commander Korvax did us an unintentional favor. Nothing unites humans like a common adversary. A costly lesson for the Confederation, Vexilleran acknowledged. But a necessary one, Chen replied. You needed to understand that technological superiority doesn't guarantee strategic advantage. We've spent our history fighting uphill battles. It's encoded in our thinking now. As the human delegation moved on, Neri leaned closer to Vexilleran. They seem almost grateful for the conflict. They are, Vexilleran replied soberly. That's what makes them dangerous and invaluable. The question now is whether the Confederation can adapt as quickly as they do. Elder Zova, materializing beside them, overheard the exchange. We will adapt because we must. For 12,000 years, we have been the teachers. Perhaps it is time we learn to be students as well. As the Earth's sun set outside the embassy windows, casting long shadows across the diplomatic chamber, Vexilleran contemplated the new galactic order taking shape. The humans had achieved in 3 years what most species required centuries to negotiate, not through overwhelming power, but through refusing to acknowledge limitations. The most terrifying species in the galaxy had turned out to be the one that simply didn't know when to quit.